Okay. Jesus. If you're wondering why I'm exhausted already and I haven't even opened any of these, it's because not only are there a lot of packages, but there's a lot of anime to talk about. Let's see. Oh. Next up, we've got the risky packaging. Kind of look for the strip. We've got 3 packages here. Let's see if I can cut through the top of all 3 of these at once. Like that. Put them all at once. Oh. These are so fucking weak, but I was able to do it. Still one more in there. There we go. Alright. Now we've got a really bonkers pile, but let's go through it. Kakegurui Season 2 collection. Yeah, there was Season 1 before. This pile isn't too big, but, you know, where we are. Region A, English dub. The game is maybe rigged, the price of losing may be lethal. And I felt the loose thing. I don't remember what the first disc had or the first season had. Interesting enough. Next up we have, I'll be honest, I'm having trouble reading that font. It's looks like it's an something Setsu. Doesn't ring a bell, and we got a sticker here that I need to take off so that we can take a look. Oh, it's different underneath the slipcover. I think that's an E. Maesetsu. Maesetsu. Mae. Maybe. I'm not sure what I'm looking at. This one makes it... For some reason it looks like a wrestling ring to me, even though I know that's not what it is. Do I know that's not what it is? Doesn't seem like it. Comedies, No Laughing Matter. Now from the creator of Lucky Star. Regions A and B. That looks like an English dub. I mean, white on bright pink is pretty illegible, but I guess I could see this. Oh, this is called Opening Set. That's music. So that gives me the impression that this is a stage that they're on. That's a microphone. This is comedy, so I guess it's not... Oh, the opening stage means comedy act. Okay. Okay, something along those lines. Kenich the Mightiest disciple to complete 2nd season. First season feels like it came out a billion years ago. I mean, I remember vaguely watching it. I guess I'm tired all the time, so I don't know what to think. Oh, always nice when it's different out of the slipcover. Discotheque Eastern Star. We'll do that. It won't become warrior or A wimp's become a warrior, or has he? Pretty simple. Yeah, I remember overall it being a pretty fun series. Jesus, where's my energy going? We've got the original 1989 OVA Appleseed. Oh yeah, it looked like that was all Japanese, but that's actually the word Appleseed. That's an interesting font. And there's probably a portion of it that's me being lazy or exhausted or something. I'm not sure. All I know is an urban combat in the City of Dreams. Different underneath the slip cover, which is nice because this has some good 1980s style artwork going for it. So if we've got that, then we can see the artwork there. In case you want it to be consistent. If you're like me, you love it when they're different like that. So there's only one superior option, and there's only one truth. Sunflowers of Inferno, I think. Some more weird font. Same on the inside. This is most likely another movie. Teacher trailer, clean ending. The masterpiece might be a forgery, but Detective Conan is the real McCoy. Oh, look. Includes English audio. Next up we have Tobikage. Ninja robots. Complete series. Tobikage. Maybe that name makes sense in that regard. I don't know. I don't. Oh, it's always different under the slipcover. Nice when it is. This one is pretty thick, so. Oh, look at that. Featuring the legendary Ninja Robots English dub. Which makes me think that this is actually a collection of both series, Tobikage and Ninja Robots. Because it's pretty common. See, this one's Tobikage Ninja Robots. This is a disc that fell out of its thing. There we go. Son of a... Maybe they... maybe... So there's a total of 4 discs. Reversible cover if you want it to look like the slip cover. That's 40 something episodes, 49 episodes on 4 discs. Well, they're not SD on BD, so 49 is still kind of high density. Anyways, Urusei Yatsura, Remember My Love, which I would guess is the 3rd movie, but to be honest, I don't know how well I remember anything other than Beautiful Dreamers being in the 2nd movie, and it being a particularly notable one. The other movies aren't quite as impactful, I thought. The trick with Urusei Yatsura is it ran for a long time, so what can it do that it didn't already do? So is the tricky thing. Well, I guess it could, if it wanted to, there's an English dub. It could always do what it already did before, but again. Did the blue outline, white outline, blue outline. How well do I remember this one? Maybe I don't remember them too well, but I do. Maybe one of them tried to go a little strange like the... No. Last but not least, we have Pokemon Legends Arceus. Arceus. I just can't pronounce that Arceus. I may have heard it pronounced that way before. We're going to open this up just because we can. But, as you can tell, even though I received it, I didn't prioritize opening it to bring the game out and play it. Part of it is I'm just not spending energy on the game. And I might choose to play it later this year. I don't know. But I'm a bit curious what's inside. It's, yeah, okay, very simple inside, but we do have the Sinnoh region in map form. Oh well. Here's this week's anime DVD collection update. Okay, let's see. There's a shit ton of stuff to go through because I did watch a wide variety of stuff. Even though I've got plenty to watch on Blu-ray here, I guess having quick access to stuff on Crunchyroll and it having an organization system built in has allowed me to at least use that to continue watching stuff there. I'll probably burn through stuff at some point, but why don't we start off where I was last week? I mentioned I was watching Monster Girl Doctor, and I mentioned it was worth putting 3 episodes in just because the first 2 episodes would make you think this is a, oh, here's the case and then here's the case. And while it does have a case per episode, that's the case for that episode for more or less. 3rd episode is when they're like, oh, and the people he's meeting as he deals with these cases are recurring characters. I did mention that one of the problems I was seeing with the show is it was definitely leaning as more of an excuse to have these weird interactions with the monster girls. Mostly on account of the fact that a lot of the problems for which he was there being helpful as a doctor were very simple, basic things. You know, it's no house. You don't watch it because of the medical intrigue that comes from it. It's even when it comes from the potential medical intrigue that comes from maybe treating a monster girl. Like if they came up with maybe not obscure, but maybe rarer versions of things that happen in humans, but they had some sort of different effect in Monster Girl because of some difference in the biology. You know, like maybe a mermaid version of pneumonia or something like that. You know, that could almost be more interesting. And that's not where the series is trying to lean. It mostly wants you to just have the interactions between the characters, and you know, it's good enough that in that regard. And it does build up to a bigger thing near the end. Nothing that's like world-shattering, but I would say that it was a pretty great thing to end on. I mean, if there's more seasons, then you know, I don't know what they're going to step it up to, and I don't know if they should step it up. Because the big problem, like a show like House, you don't have to step it up because you can just present so many different puzzles, I guess, for lack of better words. I mean, those are the words that House kind of uses to describe some of the stuff. For other people to describe House's interest in the cases, but whatever. Moving on, I watched The Eighth Son, Are You Kidding Me? And that's an interesting show because I would say that it is objectively bad, but it's actually kind of an okay series just because the way it's bad, if it's something you notice, is almost more interesting and makes it more interesting to talk about. And again, this one I could probably talk about a whole lot because it's in some sort of interesting crevice or valley or something like that. Like, it fell down there and it doesn't quite know how to climb back up. It definitely has some shortfallings that a lot of anime have. Like, I've mentioned before about how some series it just feels like it knows, oh, well, X, Y, and Z events have to happen, so they just happen to happen, and they just feel like they were thrown in there, not like their natural flow of things or something like that. This show definitely has something like that, but the interesting thing is it doesn't feel as strong. And it's hard to completely identify why, and I think it's because it had a lot of good ideas and had a lot of ideas on how to make those work, but it fell flat in a couple of ways. And I'd say throughout the series there's two persistent problems that are kind of the issues with the series, but again, these are kind of interesting. The first one is this show is kind of an isekai for no reason. And that almost feels like I'm like talking about a TV trope or something like that. Like they might have a page for something like that. And this one, of course, opens up the floodgates to a whole lot of very interesting discussion, because the entire point of what I'm bringing up here is that the show sets up that our main character is he a Japanese salaryman? He's a Japanese businessman, at least. But then he just kind of wakes up and he's a 5-year-old son of a noble. But he's the 8th son in line, and it turns out their noble family, while, having official titles, are pretty poor. And, that's an okay setup, but usually if you're choosing to go with a format that's an isekai, that's explicitly an isekai, then there's a reason that it being an isekai feeds into your interest in watching the show or what the show does or something like that. And you can see this with a whole lot of shows. Like, if you want, they were resurrected as a little kid, you can compare to something like the Saga of Tanya the Evil. So what about the Saga of Tanya the Evil makes that show interesting because it's an isekai? And I'd say that one actually has two reasons. One of those is Tanya maintains the same motivation as before the resurrection, granted with a more vengeful desire to prove being X wrong. But the other thing that's interesting is because even though they're a kid, because they have all their memories of their previous life, it means that even though the show sets up things where, conveniently, magic is in this world and they happen to be really strong at it, that's a means to an end to making some interesting plot happen. But the isekai part on top of that is that Tanya's mindset and discussion with other people are far more mature than they would necessarily be, because Tanya has understanding of what World War I Germany kind of went through, more or less. Like, they don't strike me as some sort of war otaku, but they probably would have understood, these historical events happen, and they would understand those ramifications, and they would see parallels going on in this world and talk about stuff, and they are an influencer in their world in that regard as well. And those two things really build into that series. If you have something like Leedale or Overlord, those both have this kind of setup where our main character is an over-leveled character compared to the people in their world who seem to be from a future version of the Memorpiker that they're familiar with, but things seem to have been forgotten, drifted away. There's been a power opposite of creep. So they are essential gods in their environment, and the isekai part of that, even though they're in a world that may be the video game, it's really hard to say. The isekai part of that is them bringing their powerful selves in there, and that one's explained less by, God decided to give them a gift, and more by, that their own characters transferred over. And they're not the only series to have done that as well. So, where does that leave the 8th son? Well, it really only does two things with its isekai. Like, it begins with the main character asking questions, but surprisingly enough, the kind of questions he's asking would not be out of line if they just introduced us to a character who was, just a 5-year-old son of a noble who suddenly realized that something was different about that party, and, their adventure started from there. So, them having the adult mind in the body of a child actually doesn't make a difference. It's
it's not explored. There's no real point to it. The only thing that comes to fruition is that our main character is able to read, because for some reason their language is Japanese. They don't actually say it's Japanese. They actually say, well, at least I can read the language. But he's literate. And so he's able to read notes on a device that measures your magical ability, and is able to discover that he has magical powers. And that's the only thing driving the plot that actually has anything to do with isekai. And if that sounds like that's pretty weak, it didn't have to be isekai. He could have just touched it. Maybe he knew 1 or 2 words or something like that, or maybe one of his older brothers who did read it, read it to him, and then he later touched it or something. They could have played it very easily without him having to be in an isekai. So the other one it did is a common trope in isekai, and that's throughout the series he does introduce Japanese cuisine. Nothing like super fancy, but definitely stuff that's like, oh, this is a nice simple tasty thing, this is a nice simple tasty thing, etc. Like he recreates soy sauce. This wouldn't be the first show that did it. Even Sword Art Online did that, but Sword Art Online made that one kind of special because, well, that's an entire... See, that's the interesting thing about this show, is some of the things it's missing just makes it really interesting to talk about. And that's definitely something great about it. But yeah, this one, oh yeah, here's fatty tuna this one time. And they don't really change anything. So overall, this pretty much means the Eighth Son is an isekai for no reason, which is fascinating. It's like the only show I've thought of describing that way, and maybe it's the only show I've seen that is that way. Let's see. The other thing about it that was definitely omnipresent, and this one leans a lot closer to that problem that I talked about, where shows know they want certain things to be a certain way, but they just flop it in there, and there's no interest in whether or not it's natural or not. There's something sort of like that going on here, which I think is exactly like that, but it may be a very specific example where, for some reason, the characters don't feel like they're in the same show with each other for a lot of it. And this isn't immediate obvious. This is more... See, you have your main character, and he's an overpowered character, and he has his things that happen that are important, but they also established from the opening at the very first episode, which for some reason was halfway through the episode, I'm not entirely sure why, it felt weird. It establishes, oh yeah, and here's his party of heroes. Well, when those parties of heroes are there, there's a desire to kind of merge the two, and it kind of acts like it merged the two, but they keep interacting as if they are completely separate from each other. Our main character's still off doing stuff over here, party, not a part of it, and the party's here, like, they're his chillaxing friends crashing at his house almost. And at some point, the two girls are like, oh, I guess we need to try to seduce him so we can become his concubines. And it's just like, really weird. Again, we haven't seen these characters interacting enough for that to feel natural for any reason. And it leads to some awkward stuff, which is kind of funny in its awkwardness, but it's almost ironically funny, maybe? Question mark? And then it kind of feels like they get together a little bit better. But then by the time that's happening, you're like, wait a second, there's one more character that's been in this opening from the beginning. Oh, there they are. And then it pretty much turns out to just, oh, yeah, well, they just happen to be around because they were investigating you for some reason completely unrelated to anything in this show. Ah ha ha. I guess she'll just join your group. It's almost literally that. And then she's just there, and they don't even hammer down the oddness of her being there. It just is almost sort of a background thing, sort of here and there. It's really quite strange. Overall, again, I thought it was okay, even though there are these objectively bad things, and I don't mean like, oh, subjectively. I mean, these are objectively bad storytelling things. But I think the subjectivity of the show allows for those to be really interesting things to talk about. I didn't even talk about some of the other isekai that I thought about when watching it. So, like, reincarnated as a slime. What is the relevance of him being a reincarnation? Or what's the isekai relevance there? First of all, there's his and are the audience's expectations of, you know, what it means for him to be a slime. There's also his entire attitude. I mean, even just how he was resurrected is kind of interestingly defined, and his way going forward is defined by his previous life. And when he's there, his attitude is driven by a much more... I mean, you can tell he wasn't just some monster. Like, he tells them, yeah, I want us to agree with humans because I think they're pretty cool. And, you know, that's obviously something motivated by the fact that it was an isekai, and he's got characters that he interacts with where he's like, oh, yeah, let me tell you a little bit about the place where I came from. More like, let's reconnect about the place where we came from. I don't know if I want to say too much more than that, because that may be more spoiler than I was going for. But that's what's interesting about this series, is it, I think it elicits real thought-provokedness in the unique way that it is not quite there. Oh well. Next up, I watched I'm Standing on a Million Lives. And I guess maybe there were 2 seasons, I don't know, because Crunchyroll kind of had them listed all as one big 24-episode season. Even though the opening changed halfway through, which made me think that it was a season 1 to season 2, especially since I thought it described season. And that was definitely a very strange show. I'd actually heard about it before, but I heard about it in passing from coworkers. And I'm guessing they were talking about a couple of different series, because at that time, I thought they were talking about Konosuba, and I don't even know if that existed at the same time this existed. So this could be me mixing things up, or maybe somebody watched all this stuff later enough that I'm not mixing them up. But the entire point is, I definitely heard the description for this and almost thought that it was a description of Konosuba, and there's some things kind of similar, where they both kind of have this similarity where the guy isekais, but the girls that are with him are powerful, kind of. But Konosuba is definitely trying to make them super powerful, but so ridiculously flawed that you can't help but laugh at them, whereas, you know, our main characters in both are kind of presented as potential nobodies, but they kind of show their way through, usually their ingenuity. And Standing on a Million Lives, that discrepancy isn't as extensive as Konosuba. Konosuba is intentionally playing with it just for not even giggles and laughs. That one's all about gut-bustingly shit your pants laughing so hard sort of crap. I mean, that show's legitimately funny. Million Lives is definitely going for a bit more of a story, and I guess the main premise is the first 2 girls were Wind Mage and a Warrior, and they're not very great at it per se, for very different reasons. I think that's because the show kind of portrays mages in a way where they're not as overpowered as we would think in most fantasy settings. But our main character, and the warrior girl is just too timid to really effectively pull it off as some sort of cutthroat badass. Our main character, though, he gets the class of farmer. And that's obviously not a battle class, but they do have to do battle sort of stuff. And so a lot of it is kind of him being ingenious. I say kind of because if we talk about the series as a whole, well, right now there's 24 episodes, and it doesn't cover absolutely everything. But of what it does cover, it at least starts out with him kind of digging out a niche. But the trick with this series, and it definitely makes it a little weaker as it goes, it doesn't stay tonally focused, or it doesn't feel like it does. Like, is the purpose of this to kind of torture the main characters through hilariously ambiguous stuff? Although it's not supposed to be a comedy per se, but it is supposed to be kind of a tragedy in just how, oh, well, here's expectations, here's reality, and I'm trying to think how I can talk about stuff without spoiling too much, because it's kind of tricky. But it's definitely, it feels like some parts of it were intended to play with our characters' minds. But some of it is the goal of the series for our main character to go through some sort of epiphany. It almost feels like it a lot of the time, but then sometimes it feels like it has to one-up him in ways that are definitely not very My Hero Academia. Like with My Hero Academia, this is a compliment I've given to that one a billion times. One of the things that makes it a great show is every story feels like it has something to do with the main character. They could be introducing other characters and, you know, what that character is going to go through, but somehow our main character is always a major part of what that character is having to go through, which makes it a really good series from you want to watch a protagonist who has meaning to this. A Million Lives kind of dances around that, and I don't mean like it balances on it. I mean like it feels like it is intentionally taking a couple steps back, a couple steps forward, and it's really hard. It was really hard for me to tell if the show kept on tone, which is very strange. The other issue with it was, I guess as it kind of went along, it kind of felt like it was like the story would keep moving. I'm not sure if we feel like we're moving to a goal. And it's not bad. I'd say it's maybe somewhat comparable to One Piece. So if you feel like One Piece continues to keep moving forward, this show feels like it keeps moving forward. But sometimes it feels like One Piece stays in one place for too long. And this show kind of feels like it may be doing that too? Question mark. It's really hard to say. And then the last story arc was probably the strangest. Just that one felt the most like the characters were just kind of continuing to go forward. It felt like there was some sort of dynamicness with what was going on around them that felt lessened, not present, but just kind of weaker. Which makes me feel like the show was maybe falling apart, but maybe it was falling apart in a way that was correct and good, like a controlled demolition of a building or something like that. Except not that aggressive. So I don't know. I mean, overall, I thought it was pretty entertaining. But I also kind of felt something as it continued. I don't know. Let's see. Next episode of Life with an Ordinary Guy Who Reincarnated as a Total Fantasy Knockout. Absolutely funny. As far as I can tell, that's a comedy show that's doing a good job of keeping up on its comedy. In the Land of Leadale, Jesus fucking Christ. Holy shit. I mean, it's interesting that the show did what it did, but what's probably more interesting is just how casually it did it. And I don't know what I want to say here in terms of what that is, but I have to say that was like, oh, Jesus. And I thought it was all good. One of you recommended to me My Dress Up Darling, and I did watch the first episode of it, and I do want to continue watching it. A lot of this depends on what I feel in the mood for watching what, where, when. And unfortunately, that one's because that's a continuously or currently airing series, that one's relegated to stuff I watch in the bedroom, which is basically stuff that I'm going to watch at night before I go to bed, which usually only means one, maybe two episodes. And there's a little bit of competition there. Especially when I talk about, I'm watching Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid S, which is the second season. And I wasn't entirely sure how much I felt about the first episode. It wasn't bad. It definitely felt like Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, and it was probably interesting in that it was definitely a shakeup of stuff. Not like anything groundbreaking, but more like a reason to have a second season. It's like, okay, yeah, I've seen so many shows do this. Rosen Maiden, not Rosen Maiden. Although Rosen Maiden season 2 probably did do that. Mahoromatic season 2, that's Mahoromatic, Something More Beautiful. Yeah, that one I could see some of the shaking up that happened there being kind of comparable. I don't think it changed the dynamic too much per se. But it did mean that it gave itself something really new to work with. And, you know, I've seen 3 episodes of it so far, and it's been pretty good. I kind of expected that. It's a very fucking wholesome show. I mean, I think I've been saying a lot of cuss words in this review, and part of that is the exhaustion, but part of it is emphasis. I mean, Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid isn't a good show just because, oh, cute dragon girls. It's wholesome. It just feels, you know, you just watch it and you're like, yeah, I think I even got a little bit teary-eyed in episode 3 there. I don't remember what for, but, you know, that was like, oh, that's so beautiful. It's great. It's great that they're continuing to be great. I'm still not done, because I watched the first couple episodes of Tsukimichi. So far, that's pretty fun. I don't remember if one of y'all recommended it or not. Somebody might have mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, but I think it was presented to me as kind of an... I don't think it was one of y'all. I think it was mentioned by somebody that I was chatting with in a Twitch stream. And I think it was described to me as kind of a reverse isekai. And I get what he was going at. It's not exactly a reverse isekai. It's more. It's kind of similar to Konosuba in that it's kind of got semblances of a deconstruction, but it's not actually a deconstruction. It's really a turning the ideas, turning the tropes on their heads, sorts of thing. And since I have the 3 episodes I watched kind of on the history on the TV over there, I'm trying to think if there's anything I want to specifically say, and so far it's been pretty entertaining. You know, again, only 3 episodes, but I've been approving of what it's been doing for fun. Okay. We finally get through that list. Then with my Friday friend, it turned out he had never watched Kaguya's Lelouch the Resurrection. And so we rewatched that. And I think in the rewatch, my 2 thoughts were, there were a couple scenes in there that were worrisomely a little jump aheady, like they couldn't quite take their time doing something that normally it would have been better to take the time. But it overall didn't impact. It's a good movie. I really like it. It's good with what they did with Kaguya's. I think it's a very satisfying thing. And then, last but not least, I did watch the first episode of Interspecies Reviewers. And I didn't only watch 1 episode because I'm only going to watch 1 episode. I watched only 1 episode because there were literally 24 episodes of Standing on a Million Lies. And once I finished that, I'm like, what am I going for next? And I wasn't quite sure. I'm like, well, I should at least watch 1 episode of Interspecies Reviewers because this is a pretty notable show. I mean, maybe infamous is the right word. I'm not sure. But, well, what can I say about it? So, for starters, you know, even though I don't watch a whole lot of my hentai, the stuff I have watched, I can generally say that if you can kind of tell that this is something different. This isn't even like Kite or Mezzoforte, although it's definitely more along those lines. So a lot of hentai, usually the sex that goes on in there is some sort of an excuse just to get to the sex and have sex scenes. And with Mezzoforte and Kite, I mentioned those because they have edited non-hentai versions, and they're still out there, but the shows still kind of have the general themes in there, but it's still, those scenes feel like they don't have much meaning to them. And I guess it's kind of interesting because for a lot of sex scenes like that, what even is the real interestingness of doing it? Like, I'm trying to think of stuff in other media, and since I don't categorize all that stuff, let's see. I'm thinking of Terminator, the first Terminator movie. There's a sex scene in there, but that one is edited in such a way, not that you see a whole lot, you get a whole lot out of it, but the kind of represent the intimacy of that moment as a kind of lead into the final act of the movie, basically. So that one kind of has a narrative reason. I say kind of, it has a narrative reason, whereas for a lot of hentai and pornographic stuff, they don't, and some of them completely embrace that. Some of them are just like, oh, I need a protein potion to recharge my mana, or something like that, and that's just an excuse to cut to a scene. And I mention all of this because from the one episode of Interspecies Reviewers, it's not that. It doesn't even feel like the edited version of Kite Mezzoforte. It's a series that just has as its primary content really raunchy stuff. Raunchy's not the right word. I think racy is kind of the right word, but that word also means other things. So, it's really about, oh yeah, these two guys, they, well, I can't even say it's those two guys. The entire point is they're kind of the lead of it, but they're giving these reviews. And the show isn't just about, oh yeah, they happen to give reviews, so here, they gave a review and they did this. It's trying to give you thoughtful, amusing commentary about some of the stuff. I think as an example, it opens up with, I don't remember the names too well, like the human guy who just did it with a 500-year-old elf in a brothel. And the elf thinking that he's disgusting because she's ugly. But the point of contention there is that it isn't that she's 500 years old. It's that to an elf, 500 years old is old, and that kind of manifests not in how they physically look, but kind of in how their magical abilities feel. So their magical abilities feel old as opposed to them looking old. And then as a contrast, the elf person likes this 50-year-old brothel lady. And, she's intentionally drawn as an aging woman. But the point is, to an elf, she's under 100 years old. Jesus Christ, it's like robbing the cradle or something like that. I mean, they don't actually say that, but they imply it. And they also say that, I guess, her magical vigor still feels up there. And it's this interesting contrast that they've created between these. It's like, that is a legitimately clever approach to this. It raises questions, but it turns out to be more questions about their universe than about anything. It's just, that's kind of an engaging approach to the idea, and this show's leading off on a good first step. The scenes in there that were of intimacy were done in such a way that I'd say they're actually pretty comparable to stuff that I've seen in other anime. I've seen somebody point out that there's some stuff in here that is censored that wasn't censored in certain other broadcasts, and maybe this calls itself uncensored, but it's too bad that it's not. And I could probably see some of that, but I also didn't personally care, but it's definitely worth mentioning for anybody for whom it does care. I mean, there's something to be said about how if there's an original version where you can see the genitalia of certain characters in certain scenes that aren't present in this version, that could be considered a change. And how effective it is questionable, but it could be like the 4 different versions of Kite, where, do you really need to see the 2 versions down there to enjoy the fundamental story? But it is still interesting to know that those versions exist. Even though I can't really say that any of them would be any particular version I care to watch, per se. Oh well. Anyways. That's the first episode. I do plan to watch more episodes because the first episode covered the general concepts of what I thought could have been strung out across a couple of different episodes. So if it's doing that to only set it up in the first episode, that definitely has me curious what it plans to do as it goes episode to episode, and if it stays fresh as it does that. Because, like I said, it's got these really interesting approaches it's taking to all this stuff, and it's surprisingly engaging. It feels less like, oh, we put these characters down for an excuse for them to do the dirty deed with each other. It's more like we are taking a peek into their weird world. And the weirdness isn't necessarily that weird, it's just kind of a lot of your standard fantasy tropes, except they're acknowledging that certain red light districts exist all over the place and characters have needs. And you know what? Konosuba kind of acknowledged that stuff too with the succubi. In fact, this one calls them succub girls, and the idea, I guess, is everybody has a little bit of succubus in their DNA, so any girl could be a succub girl or something like that. But I don't know. It's interesting stuff. But for some reason, I don't know if it has anything to do with watching all this. Definitely exhausted, but still wanting to watch so much of it. So I guess we'll have to see if maybe I run out of steam kind of soon. You know, not much to say in the Dead by Daylight front because, like I mentioned last time or time before, I'm going super long-term project. So, yeah, I'm just leveling up all the killers until they reach their first teachable. So for once, I've already unlocked stuff. They go to the next highest, or if I've unlocked everything already, they're being leveled up to 50. It's definitely going a little bit faster for two reasons. One, it's a lot easier to get blood points as killers, and if I'm focusing on killers more, then I'm getting them faster. Two, there's also the lunar event going on, the Lunar New Year, Year of the Tiger stuff, and that's giving more blood points as well. Good things. Alright. Y'all, have a nice week.